Welcome back to my channel. I don't like bringing up sexual things here, partly because people will claim I'm just doing it to get clicks. But this time it is a noteworthy part of the point I'll be making. Hopefully you are mature enough not to be offended. Besides, it's also all about science. I'll get to the crazy sex stuff, but I need to work up to it, starting with this background. Long ago, I read about some scientists who were doing research on some tiny salamanders, but they couldn't get funding. So they changed the title and description to say something like, "The effect of global warming on those creatures." Suddenly, they got their funding. It's almost as if funding was more about promoting certain political views rather than actual science. It also should explain why you can't really trust scientists so much anymore. They've always had the same human failings as anyone else. Well, what would you do if your career was dependent on funding from sources with their own political agenda? Later, I read about a group of people who deliberately made up phony research with asinine claims, and they submitted this research to prestigious science journals. You know, those peer-reviewed journals that we hear so much about. These fake research papers just used all the approved rhetoric of the extreme left and often got published, even though they deliberately said ridiculous things. Think about that the next time you are told someone's science is trustworthy because they get articles printed in peer-reviewed journals. Everything has been politicized. Which brings me to this guy.
Why did I write those freaking hoax papers?
I don't know if he was part of those fake studies I mentioned, or if he just did the same thing on his own to show the bias in so-called science. But the point is the same either way. Let's see how crazy things get.
Well, once upon a time, there was a paper in 2016 that came out about feminist glaciology. I'm not kidding. And it had lots of National Science Foundation money behind it, $800,000 on a grant.
Feminist glaciology? What the crap is that? Not to mention, why spend $800,000 on it? I checked, and it's a lousy report of just 24 pages. It reads much like something that could be turned out with AI using various buzzwords rather than a meaningful study. I'd do that work for a lousy $10,000. But what the heck is feminist glaciology? Turns out much of it is the usual ranting about not enough women in the field of glaciology. So think of feminist glaciology as just a typical whining of some women. The article also whined about the use of masculine terminology, like stories of the heroic effort sometimes brought to the field. Well, it can be very challenging work, so why complain about such terminology? Unless you are more into feminist ideology rather than real science. The article is called Glaciers, Gender, and Science, a Feminist Glaciology Framework for Global Environmental Change Research, which is just weird and doesn't sound like real science at all. One of the women researchers the article refers to a lot seems to be a social scientist, including studying societies who lived near glaciers. That's fine, but there was a strange application of what may be legitimate social science onto hard science. For example, she would talk about the local people living around glaciers and their stories. Sure, actual glaciologists may benefit when they first set out to study a glacier by listening to people who have lived there all their lives and can relate changes going back well before scientists arrived. That's not a bad starting point. But the article describes this social scientist as saying glaciologists study the glacial ice itself, and also says that the indigenous accounts do not portray the ice as passive to be measured and mastered in a stereotypical masculine sense. Okay? Let's see what else the study described her as saying. The glaciers are willful, capricious, easily excited by human intemperance, but equally placated by quick-witted human responses. Wow, glaciers get excited. Who knew? Considering how big they are, I sure am glad we can placate them if quick-witted enough, so I can avoid the risk of an upset glacier suddenly pouncing on me. There aren't any glaciers around me to see how hard they are to placate, But I can start with something simpler and less threatening, like maybe ice cubes. But these cultural views of glaciers aren't scientific and are of no real use in true science. The supposed sexist and racist issues are mentioned next.
And so what this actually argues is that glaciology is a sexist and racist field because it does not include feminist perspectives and indigenous perspectives on ice.
Now that is no real surprise. Never mind whether or not there are many women who even want to be in this field. Perhaps feminists should complain that they aren't equally represented in the field of trash collection. When they care about that, maybe I'll take them more seriously. Then we get more Looney Tunes.
And there's literally a section in the paper about why glaciology doesn't include glacier sex. And I exaggerate not at all.
This scientific article does bring these things up. How? Well, they literally bring up various fictional stories as if they matter to real science, like this general example. Other literature tackles emotional, psychological, and sexual interactions with glaciers. Just absolute nonsense outside the actual world of fiction. What next? Glacier porn? There are other fiction writers the study mentions. Saint Germain, Le Guin, Kahn, and many others approach glaciers from distant and very disciplinary and artistic spaces compared with glaciologists. I would hope so. There is a rather large difference between fictional stories and, hard science. There is no reason to factor in fiction when doing science. If that is what feminist glaciation is about, we shouldn't allow feminists in the field. In fiction, you can literally ignore every scientific law, but such fiction has nothing to do with science. Maybe I can get a grant to do research on whether the Land of Oz should be given membership in the United Nations. It would be just as logical if fictional writings matter. The researchers also want more input from indigenous people, but think about this context.
There's another indigenous belief somewhere in the world near a glacier that if you fry pork fat too close to the glacier can smell it and then will move.
Here's what the study actually said. Proper behavior is deferential. I was warned, for instance, about firm taboos against cooking with grease near glaciers that are offended by such smells. Cooked food, especially fat, might grow into a glacier overnight if improperly handled. Well, for many years, I've heard climate scientists say it's bad that glaciers are melting. It seems we now have a simple solution. Just cook food with fat and overnight, we can get a brand new glacier. Too bad that cooking with grease will also offend the glaciers, but no solution is perfect. Keep things like this in mind whenever someone tries to claim they believe the science. But the science has gone off the rails. Why should a glaciologist care about such legends? Back to sanity, studying the local customs, legends, etc. is perfectly fine. It's what social science is all about. But that isn't hard science and isn't helpful to it.
They actually take this superstition to a glaciologist. They ask him, why do you only concern yourself with physical models of flow and viscosity or whatever when examining how glaciers move? Why don't you incorporate the bacon fat thing or pork fat thing or whatever? And the guy just closed the door in their face.
I suspect if someone asked a glaciologist if he factored in the possibility that the Earth is flat, he'd have a similar reaction.
And they said that this was further proof of just how exclusionary to new ideas glaciology is.
I say it's generally a good thing to exclude stupidity, superstition, and ignorance from science. Not too many decades ago, I used to read how corrupted many subject areas in college had become, and it was only the hard sciences that still function properly because real science is based on repeatable facts, not feminism or racial views or any other social rhetoric. Well, that's not true anymore. It isn't just science. Even math is being corrupted. We'll hear how expecting black kids to be able to say 2 + 2 = 4 is racist. Even as our math scores have dropped, Many so-called educators think we need to teach about the racist aspects of math. It's absolute insanity. Time to wake up. Thanks for watching, and don't let the trolls stop you from speaking out.